Now, what's the difference between these two selectors? Well, we've been talking about that. This is the FMC master selector, and this is the instrument source select switch that each pilot has, one for the captain, one for the first officers, on your instrument source select panel. So normally the the captain is in the FMC left position, the first officer is in the FMC right position. But you'll notice you have the ability to change from the FMC left to the FMC right position, and for a single FMC failure, in this case the left, we would go ahead and do that because we'll get our map back on our ND when we change from left to right. And then we could take our master selector and go to right, and then we'd be back in business as far as LNAV and VNAV is concerned. It will be down to a single FMC problem. So this is the master selector, this is the instrument source select switch for the FMC, of which both pilots have one. FMC left, first officer, FMC right. The master selector for the FMC, it kind of does three things, and we talked about that as well. It gives information to the FCCs, the flight control computers. I think this shows up here in a minute. And because the autopilot, the left FMC is giving the information to the flight control computers, so when you're flying in LNAV and VNAV, that information is coming from the left FMC. And if the left FMC fails, well, that's when you're going to get this degradation of modes. And that's when you're going to get the autopilot degraded message. And that's when you're going to have to do something about this, which is take control by going to a different roll mode, different pitch mode. You also are going to, the left FMC will give information to the EECs. So if the left FMC fails, the auto throttle is going to be lost. And so that's the thrust management function part of the flight management computer. And the auto throttle is kind of in that thrust management function part of the FMC. So if you lose, in this case, like the left FMC, you're going to lose the auto throttle as well. And that's why this goes blank. And you'll hear the beep, 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 and then of course we're manual thrust at that point. And then the other thing that the master selector does is it gives information to the nav radios for automatic radio tuning and position updating. So we're going to lose that function as well. And then we're going to have to manually tune things like the ILS or the VOR frequency if they're not tuned already. But you would lose the ability to automatically tune nav aids like we have in the normal function. So that's all this master switch does. It gives information to the EECs, the FCCs, the nav radios. And again, that left FMC is giving information so the airplane can, when it's flying in LNAV and VNAV, that information is coming from that left FMC. Now when you lose both FMCs, here's what you get. You get 3 CDU pages. So you have a legs page, you have the progress page, and you have the nav radio page. But they're called the active IRS legs page, it's called the IRS progress page, and it's called the alternate nav radio page. And this is what you get when you're in alternate navigation, meaning both FMCs have failed. All the other pages you lose. So, VNAV pages, fixed pages, the route page, all that stuff's gone. All you have is legs, progress, and navrad. So active IRS legs, IRS progress page, and the alternate navrad page, those 3 pages. This is what the IRS legs page looks like. It's basically the same as a normal legs page as far as waypoints goes. So it retains all the waypoints that existed in your route at the time of the failure. So depending on where you are when both FMCs fail, and you program in your route to your destination, that route's still going to be there. All of those waypoints are still going to be there. Because you can kind of think of this as both FMCs are big computers. They're the big black boxes, that are in the E&E compartment. Well, the CDU itself is a little microprocessor. It's a little computer. And it has the ability to retain up to 120 waypoints that existed in your root at the time of the failure. So whatever's in your root is going to remain. And it remembers, what the latitude and longitude is of those points too, and it even lists it right here. And you still have the mileage between the points. And you'll notice that the first waypoint is magnetic, but everything else is true, because you don't have the FMC tables anymore of what the magnetic variation is of all those other waypoints. So it can't really figure out the magnetic course of all the other waypoints. It can figure out the magnetic course of the active waypoint, but not of any of the downtrack waypoints. So everything else will be in true. The first waypoint's in magnetic. You'll notice that if you wanted to go direct, let's say, ATC gives us direct to Papa Sierra Kilo, you could do it the way you normally do it. You could bring Papa Sierra Kilo to the scratch pad, and you could bring it to the top, and then you could execute it, and it'll go direct to Papa Sierra Kilo. Because what it's really doing is it's going to this lat long. And that's what it normally does in normal operation too. It's just that we can call it this, but it knows what the lat long is at that waypoint. But when we're in alternate navigation, it's going to that lat long that represents Papa Sierra Kilo. And we can call it Papa Sierra Kilo because it's remembered. But if they cleared us somewhere that was off our route, then we would have to type in the lat long, because the only thing the microprocessor remembers, the little CDU remembers, is what was in there prior to the failure. But after that, it doesn't remember anything. So if you were given direct to, let's say, LAX, you'd have to put the lat long in for LAX VOR in order to navigate to that. Also, when you put in Papa Sierra Kilo and you bring it to the top, let's say, you're going to get on your map, you're going to get the white dashed line going to Papa Sierra Kilo, and you'll execute that, and you've got a solid magenta line. But that's going to show up on your ND, but not the other pilot's ND, because they're completely separate now. The left CDU is different from the right CDU, is different from the center CDU. They're not talking to one another anymore. They're completely separate. So if you do a route modification in one and you want it to match, you have to do it on the other side too. And then how are we going to go to Papa Sierra Kilo? Well, we don't have LNAV anymore, so we have to use heading select. So we could, set our heading bug to go to Papa Sierra Kilo. But there's no LNAV, there's no VNAV, there's no auto throttle. And we lose a lot of our pages, our nice pages that we had as a convenience. All that stuff's gone when you're dual FMC. And these are all the mileages to between the waypoints. Progress page looks very similar to the normal progress page, except instead of ETAs now you have time to go. So before we had ETAs that would say when we're going to get there is referencing our time. Well, now we have time to go, so we'd have to add our time to that time to go to get when we're going to be there. So if the next waypoint is Golf Victor Echo, then we'd have to add 25 minutes to our current time to get the time we're going to get there. We also have the distance to go. That's no different from the active waypoint to the next waypoint to the destination. But you'll notice down here there's some differences. The IRS that's associated with this CDU will be shown. In this case, it's the right IRS. So this would be like the first officer's CDU. And the right IRS would be associated there, and it would give the lat long of the right IRS. It would also give the ground speed that's coming from that IRU. And then it would give our cross-track error. If we do have the magenta line, we can see what our cross-track error is to that magenta line as we fly it in heading select. It's going to have the desired track and the actual track as well between what's on the CDU as far as the magenta line goes. So the progress page is actually pretty similar, except it just doesn't have those nice ETAs. And it's got some additional information down here that you didn't have on the normal progress page. And then the alternate nav-rad page is going to be different in the sense that you're just going to see the VORs that are associated with your side, the ADF that's associated with your side, and the ILS that's associated with your side. And so in the case of the captain, that's going to be the left VOR, the left ADF, and the left ILS. In the case of the first officer, it's going to be the right VOR, the right ADF, and the right ILS. And in the case of the center CDU, it'd be the center ILS. And these may be in there automatically. Like if this was put in prior to the failure, then it would be put in there automatically. It would remember it. But if the ILS was not put in there, then you'd have to manually tune this frequency. There's no auto-tuning anymore, remember, so you'd have to put 110.8/037 and line select it into the ILS line. Or any VOR that you want is going to have to be manually tuned. And of course, ADFs are manually tuned anyway, so that no change there. They have to be manually tuned anyway. But the VORs were automatically tuned and the ILS is automatically tuned. Well, that's not available anymore when both FMCs have failed. You can still use the pre-select line, nothing wrong with that. And then, of course, one thing we're going to have to do when we come in for the approach is we're going to have to know what our gross weight is in order to get our VREF speed, in order to figure out our flap speeds for landing, because that nice information is gone now. Remember, the perf-init page is gone, right? So if the perf-init page is gone, you're going to know what your zero fuel weight is, because that's a fixed number. And then you're going to have your fuel on board, and so you're going to add that zero fuel weight to your fuel to come up with this number of, let's say, 650. And then come up with that VREF 30 speed 149. And then on most QRHs, they used to have this table. Something tells me they've taken this out, and I'm not sure why. Because if you have a dual FMC problem, you need to know this. It's not that hard, actually, to remember. The up bug is plus 80, VREF 30 plus 80, and then you go down 20 knots for each one. So VREF plus 80 is the up bug, plus 60 is flaps 1, plus 40 is flaps 5, plus 20 is flaps 10, and then you go down 10 knots. Flap 20 is plus 10, and then you got your VREF 25 or VREF 30 speed if we landed at flap 30 or 25. So it's kind of easy here to remember this, but there is a chart generally in the performance section for the flap maneuver speeds. So we could take that 149 and then add 80 to it, and that would be 229. And then go down 10 knots, 209, and then go down another 20 knots and get to, you'd go like that. And you'd come up with a chart, basically, that has your flap up speed, flap 1, flap 5, flap 10, flap 20, and flap 30 speeds. And so you could reference those, because these speeds are no longer going to be on your PFD because you have no approach reference page to get that. So we have to figure these out manually, so we'll do that. So if you do lose both FMCs, you're going to get the autopilot degraded message, and that means that the airplane's been put in an attitude stabilizing mode. We're going to look at that, and we're going to say, okay, there's a degradation in roll mode, there's a degradation in pitch mode, I need to go to heading select, I need to go to flight level change. Or I need to go to heading select, and it's an altitude hold, so we're good. If there was no FMA degradation, if you looked up there and you saw nothing, there's no FMA change, well, chances are in that case it could be that the autopilot is degraded. And so what are we going to do? We can disconnect the autopilot and re-engage another autopilot and see if we get it again. And chances are it could be just an autopilot problem, and we might have two other good autopilots. If we were to get it again, I might suspect that it could be maybe something like a stab turn problem. When I disconnect it, I'll be feeling if there's forward pressure or aft pressure that I'm holding or no pressure. And it could be that there's maybe a stabilizer problem, whether it's the stabilizer's been cut out and we get a message for that. or maybe we're going to get an unscheduled stab trim. But either way, I'm going to disconnect the autopilot. If there's no FMA change, I'm going to disconnect the autopilot and try a different autopilot. So again, the CDUs will retain the flight plan waypoints in the CDU because, like we said, they are a little microprocessor. They're a little computer that remembers. And so they'll remember up to 120 waypoints in the flight plan. And so it retains those waypoints at the time of the failure of both FMCs. Any new waypoints have to be entered by latitude, longitude. Any old waypoints, we can call it by its name. And because it remembers that lat long is for that name. But any new waypoints, we have to enter the lat long to go direct to them. The retained waypoints are modified as normal, but each side is independent. What that means is the left CDU is different from the right CDU, is different from the center CDU. So the retained waypoints can be modified as normal. But when you execute, it's only going to show up on one side. So if you go direct to ABC and ABC is part of your route, then that's fine. But it's just going to show up on the left side, let's say, if you were to put that in. So the first officer would have to put that in as well. And they could be off a little bit because one's getting left IRS information, the other's getting right IRS information. So, but you could, split the difference. And again, you'd have no LNAV, so you'd have to fly in heading select. Again, what's inoperative? LNAV, VNAV, and the auto throttle are inoperative. So the route can be flown in heading select and flight level change for the descent, for example. It would be fine, or any other pitch mode or roll mode. Interestingly, Land 3 and Land 2, the auto land's still operational. There's nothing wrong with the auto land. We can still do an auto land just fine. It's just that there's no auto throttle, so you're going to be the auto throttle. The pilot's the auto throttle. So the pilot flying would fly the airplane, monitor airspeed and airspeed control because that's manual thrust. Again, we have to figure out the maneuver speeds for landing. We can do that because we know the zero fuel weight. We do have the fuel on board. We can add those together to come up with a gross weight, and then we can go to the chart in the QRH to get the flap maneuver speeds. Again, many people know these speeds as plus 80, plus 60, plus 40, plus 20, plus 10, and then VREF 30. So it's not something that you could know this anyway as one of the pilots of these airplanes. And then you must tune the nav aids manually. So the nav aids have to be tuned manually. What was tuned previous to the failure would still be tuned. So that's a good thing. But if there's something new you want to tune, you have to tune it manually. What's this?